It's going to include this stapled packet that we're finishing up today. It's going to include these dirty little male and female pictures that I gave you. And it's going to include this packet that I just gave you right now on the male and female hormones and reproduction. That's what it's going to be on. Oh, thank you. Let me borrow that a minute. And it's going to include this, which is the structures of the endocrine glands from lab. So we'll go back through that. So you always need the structures. That's this sheet. Then you need the spreadsheet that we kept using at the same time. And you need the packet that we covered in lecture that we're finishing up today.
And this is for test 5? Lecture test 5?
This is all for Monday's lecture test 5. In addition to those 3 endocrine things, it is an endocrine / reproduction test. You need the dirty little girl and boy pictures, and you need this hormone sheet that I'm going to go over today. So that's 5 definite things that you have to have. Grace, let me have that a minute. This, I went over it with you. So if you need that, then study that as well, because that's reproductive structure. Because things like stereocilia that don't beat in the epididymis, glans penis on the top of your penis. Yes, so if you need to look at this in order to know those things, then add that to the packet as well. So that would be 6 sheets. No, you don't need that. That's for lab. Yes?
Just the back of the girl and boy?
Of course. One's girl and one's boy.
Well, yeah, but that was the front. You know that for lecture too. There's a girl.
Yeah. You got another girl? That's the
Oh,
guy.
okay, I see it now.
Yes.
On this part, you have to know every week.
Yes. See, Train is asking on this is yours, Grace. Train is asking for the lecture test. Do you have to know every little bit of this? Yes. That's where I'm really emphasizing this, because this tells the gland, maybe the cell, perhaps the lobe, but even more importantly, it covers the normal role of the hormone and what happens if you over or under secrete, and what that abnormality is called, like giantism or acromegaly or Cushing syndrome. So know those. You are not being tested on the hormones or the hyper and hyposecretions on a lab exam. On a lab exam, you're just being asked structures, with the exception of the 2 living animal experiments, and I gave you a little write-up on that for lab only. Okay, does that answer what you want to know, Train? Anything else? These are good clarifications. So you got your 6 packets. Is there anybody who didn't get their 6 packets together? Okay, this is no joke. This is a lot of material, like the last urinary metabolism test. So you've got to get your study groups together and start working on this so that you can go off for the holidays feeling good about yourself. Yes, ma'am.
On the male, female, and hormone for reproductive packet, will we finish going over that this today?
I'm trying to.
Oh,
Okay. You do the male part of that in the lab. You were in the lab. So I told you in the lab we do the female in the lecture. Anything else? Okay. Anything else up here that you have a question about? Well, I'll leave that so you have a chance to get to it if you haven't already. So we were doing the typed test 5 packet about hormones, and we were talking about how hormones interact at the level of the cell at receptor sites. So we had talked about hormones that are stuck outside the cell at specific fixed receptor sites, and largely cyclic AMP acts as a second messenger to carry out the role inside. Those kind of hormones are mainly protein hormones, amines, amino acids. With one very weird exception, it also is the prostaglandin group, the fatty acid group. Now we want to talk about hormones that are usually steroids, fat soluble. So we're down here at hormones that act at specific mobile receptor sites. And these are the ones that go into the cell to find their moving around receptor site. But it's still very specific, one hormone to a particular receptor in the cytoplasm. These are the hormones that ultimately are going to go into the nucleus to turn on or turn off genes. But that's why they had to hook up with their cytoplasmic receptor. They weren't the right shape to be able to go into the nucleus and bind to the genes, the DNA, until they are hooked to their specific receptor site. Here is another exception where you have a hormone that isn't a steroid, isn't fat soluble, but for whatever odd reason about its shape, thyroxine gets to enter the cell and acts by this mechanism. Okay, so there always are exceptions to most any rule that you come up with. All right. So in this story, this is your cell membrane again. So this is the outside of the cell. And this is the inside of the cell. And since this is fat soluble and the construction of the cell membrane is a double layer of phospholipids, mainly fats, then like dissolves like, and that's why a steroid hormone gets to come in easily. So that's not a challenge when you're fat soluble. So the example that I'm using is estrogen, one of the female secondary sex hormones. And so this is entering the cells of the uterus. And estrogen finds its cytoplasmic receptor, so you see that's in quotes. So when the estrogen hooks to its cytoplasmic receptor, that changes the shape of the estrogen when it's bonded. So it's now an E-CRC, an estrogen-cytoplasmic receptor complex, and it says that right here. So it's always the name of the hormone and then a CRC, cytoplasmic receptor complex. So now the size of the hormone and its shape is different, so now it gets to go into the nucleus. But if it didn't do that, it couldn't do that. Once it gets in there, it has to bind, so you're inside the nucleus, there is a chromosome receptor there over on the DNA, and so it has to bind to that. And that all according to what chromosome receptor it hooks to, it turns on or turns off a gene. Now, if this is estrogen, is it going to turn on or off the male genes? Off. But is it going to turn on or off the female genes? On. So you can see what it's going to do. So it causes the development of female traits and inhibits the expression of major male traits. If it were a male, it's just the opposite. It would suppress the genes for femaleness and it would turn on the genes for male. And we all start developing as a female. That's why we all have teats, nipples. But at some point, the male secondary sex hormones come in here and turn off the female genes, and from that point on, you don't read the female side of the issue anymore, you read the male side of the issue. And that's assuming that you haven't had a genetic nick and broken off any parts of these turn on, turn off structures. In the male, it's called the SRY gene. I'm not going to test you on SRY, but as long as you have the full thing, then you'll read the male traits. Sometimes that's right at the end of the Y chromosome. That's the male chromosome. Sometimes people will have broken off a little piece of that Y chromosome and not get the full SRY gene. And that's when you get a hermaphrodite that has some structures in the body that are female because it didn't turn off those genes that it should have, and some structures that are male. So anomalies happen when you have breaks or interruptions in the DNA. Are we okay on that? If most of these things that we've been talking about up to this point were secreted by a gland, traveled in the bloodstream, got to the cell, and then had to find their receptor site either on the outside of the cell or now we're seeing inside the cell. Some hormones are under neural control, nerve control. So, in other words, and they're not true hormones in every sense of the word, but in other words, they're made by nerve cells, neurons, in the hypothalamus. And then they travel from the hypothalamus down to your pituitary gland where they're stored in the posterior lobe, which is also known as the neurohypophysis. So essentially what you're saying is the dendrites and cell bodies are up here in the hypothalamus. The part that travels through the infundibulum stalk of your pituitary gland is the axon, and what's down there in the posterior pituitary gland are these synaptic knobs. And it's in these synaptic knobs that you either have a cell filled up with ADH or another nerve cell that would come down here filled up with oxytocin. So it all depends on, did you fire this nerve cell that might have been your ADH maker, or did you fire another nerve cell that might be your oxytocin maker? There are two different clusters, nuclei of cells up there in your hypothalamus floor of your brain. And we've talked about that before. I'm just trying to remind you about it. Now, we've already talked about oxytocin, but we're fixing to talk about, on the next page, feedback mechanisms. Oxytocin and prolactin that makes you make milk. Are the only two hormones that I know of that are positive, and I should say direct positive feedback mechanisms in the human body. That means that they're positive in that as long as the stimulus is there, you're going to secrete more and more of the hormone, and therefore the action is going to become greater and greater. This one, for instance, is your birth hormone. So you're going to have more and more labor contractions and more forceful labor contractions as long as the baby is still in the body. So that's why it's called positive. It's accelerating it. It accelerates it. Flip over, everybody. Over here, it tells you that. As long as the stimulus is present, more hormone is released and the actions speed up and intensify. So in this case, you're talking labor contractions. If it was at the breast, which it could be, you're talking milk letdown, expulsion out of the mammary glands. So that is direct positive feedback. In the case of prolactin, you would make more milk as long as you are using lots of milk. So the more milk you use, then the more milk the breast will make in general. That's assuming there is no stress or illness or other complication that's messing with you. Psychologically, milk production can be inhibited by a lot of different factors, but assuming you don't have any other issues going on, good luck with that one. As you're sleepy and tired and the baby's sick and then you're sick and dad's sick and car breaks down and, you know, life is life. It always tests you. Okay. I do not know of any indirect positive hormone pathways. Never heard of one. And think about it. It wouldn't be very likely. Indirect pathways mean, and if it's positive, it just says you're going to always secrete more and more and more and more and more hormone. The more hormone you secrete, the more you're going to secrete. Well, that wouldn't make sense. You would be out of control if that were the fact. At least this one stops when the stimulus is no longer there. You know, the baby's not in the uterus anymore, that stops. Baby's not suckling at the breast, that stops. That's the action. Okay. All right. Let's look at indirect mechanisms and negative. You are negative if it stops you from making more hormones. So in both of these cases, it's going to reduce the hormone production. Hormone inhibits its further release. If it's called direct negative feedback, it is the action that makes you stop making more hormone. You got the action you wanted. So the word direct or indirect has to do with, is it the action or is it the amount of hormone? If it's called direct, we're always talking about an action. We were talking about actions down here, labor contractions, milk letdown, milk production. It is an action you're talking about. And I'm going to do one of these in just a second with you. If it's indirect negative, again it's negative, it's going to stop the further production of hormone, inhibit it, but it's the amount of hormone you've already made that determines it. A very good example here is a male. Sex hormone. When a male hits puberty, he starts making testosterone. That's the first time since he's been born that he makes testosterone. And from that day, let's say 9 years old, till the day he dies, he's going to make a set amount of testosterone and keep that level in his blood from now on. So it is the level of hormone. That's when you call it indirect, when it's the level of hormone and not the action that it triggers. Now, he could screw that up. If he had circulatory blockages, maybe he wouldn't have the right level in there. Or if he had nerve damage somewhere in his body, maybe he wouldn't have the right amount in there. But we're assuming he's normal and healthy. Till the day he dies, he should be a testosterone maker, and therefore he should have sperm till he dies. So what this says is, if you're going along and all of a sudden he secreted a little bit too much testosterone, your body says, no, 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 you're now getting above the level, inhibit it, so it drops back down and stays level. If he drops below the baseline, his body's going to say, no, 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 you're supposed to be up here, so make a little bit. But it's always the hormone that's determining whether he makes more or not, and therefore he tries to stay as close to that baseline as always. So that's pretty easy to understand when it's indirect negative feedback. All right, let's do one that's controlled by the action. I'm going to look at the effect of cold temperature on your thyroid gland. Now, there are lots of different things that affect your thyroid gland, and there are lots of different things that can cause you to heat up the body as well, but we're just isolating one little event here. So you're cold, and so you send that information because you have cold receptors around your body. In Anatomy 1, you learned that those were called Krause's in bulbs. But anyway, they're in your skin, you're cold. So you send that information to your central nervous system, your brain. Part of your brain is the floor of the brain called the hypothalamus. So when it is told, and it's your thermostat, by the way, this is your thermostat, that tries to bring you back towards homeostasis with regard to temperature. And so your hypothalamus says, okay, we got a problem. Then we need to build up the rate at which you're burning food, because when you're breaking down food, you're releasing a lot of heat energy. 100% of the bonds of food doesn't go into forming the bonds of ATP. More than 50% of that energy is lost as heat, so it'll warm you back up. So the hypothalamus has releasing factors. So it releases thyroid stimulating hormone releasing factor. which always goes into the bloodstream, always only goes, all releasing factors only go to your anterior lobe of your pituitary gland, and it makes it release a hormone by the same name, thyroid stimulating hormone. So that master gland, the anterior pituitary gland, is now controlling the thyroid gland, because this TSH is going to go in the blood to the thyroid gland and make it secrete thyroxine hormone, whether it be T3 or T4, triiodothyronine or tetraiodothyronine. That's going to go out in your blood to your general body cells, because this happens to be a hormone that acts rather generally throughout your body cells. So it's going to speed up your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. That is the resting rate at which we burn food. In other words, what we're all doing right now. We're not exerting, we're not exercising, we're not in emergency. That's the rate at which we typically burn food. Now we're burning food faster, and you release some of that food that you're breaking the carbon-to-carbon bonds down as heat. And so it begins to warm you up. That's the action. This is the action your body wanted, because you were too cold. So you got what you asked for. The minute you get what you wanted, it begins to inhibit this further. So it inhibits here first, the anterior pituitary gland. But maybe at that moment in time, you also started exercising. So maybe you increase the heat, because now you're not only burning food, but you're exercising, and that also releases heat. So a higher level of heat will eventually inhibit here. So that is the second inhibition point. So if you don't stop it by inhibiting your pituitary gland, if you get hotter, it'll inhibit your hypothalamus. That is an example where the action is what inhibited further hormones from being made. When it is the action, it's called indirect. When it's inhibiting further hormone production, it's negative feedback. That's how most hormones work. Is we either got enough of the chemical in your blood and it says stop, negative, or we got the action we asked for and your body says stop, and that's negative. So anytime you're saying no more, that's negative. The word indirect is what it means when you say it's the action that caused it to inhibit it. The word direct is when it, I said that backwards. The word direct means it's the action that caused you to stop. The word indirect means it is the amount of hormone that are presently in your blood that stopped you from further secretion. Okay, so with that, I think I've covered everything about hormone physiology as far as how they work. You don't have to go looking for extra examples. Know what is in here and know your structure packets as well, and your spreadsheet. So we were going to talk more about reproductive hormones. So that is why I passed out this packet to you as you came in. You morning lab people, you already have this packet. Please get it out. Oh, I didn't give you one. That's what, that other one? Here's this one. Is there anybody else I didn't get one out to? Make sure I didn't scribble all over that when you open it up. Are you okay? Okay. Now, we're going to do the male part in lab. So let's flip over and look at the female part. And as I introduce this, I'm reminding you of some stuff you've already been taught, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So this is the biological symbol for femaleness, female reproductive hormones. And in a mature, in other words, what I mean by mature is a female who's already been through puberty, so she is having monthly menstrual cycles and ripening an egg each month. And that cycle, if you're a regular woman, regular in that you can go by a calendar and you're somewhat reliable month to month, then we're going to say generically it's a 28-day cycle. very few women are really that regular. 1 month it may take you more days to get there, and another month it's quicker, so good luck on knowing the answer to which days did you have that menses, that blood release from your body. It's very hard to keep up with. But anyway, we're pretending we're all clockwork. Okay? Now, well, I haven't even started the story yet. I want to talk to you about hormone manufacture in the female. Inside of an ovary, which I haven't drawn here, you make an egg sac ripen each month. This is just the egg sac. It is called a Graafian follicle. And so in it is an egg, and I didn't even put a nucleus in the egg, so if you want to put a nucleus in your egg, fine. So that's what that is. And these cells right here are cuboidal cells around the egg, and these are additional cuboidal cells on the outside of the Graafian follicle. Those two sets of cuboidal cells make progesterone and estrogen. Both of those hormones are made here, and both of those hormones are made here. And from now on, I'm going to not write out progesterone and estrogen. I'm just going to put a P for progesterone and an E for estrogen. Now, this thing ripens, and you've seen our rendition of ovaries on your Dirty Little Girl pages that I gave you last week. It literally starts growing out the side wall of the ovary like a wart, and finally it stretches the ovary wall so far that it blows out the ovary wall like pollen floating in the air. And so this is what left the Graafian follicle. Just this region right here left. So there it is. There's your little egg, and there's the cuboidal cells around the egg. That did the egg release. Egg release is called ovulation. So ovulation was day 14 of this 28-day female cycle. And so your Graafian follicle isn't called a Graafian follicle anymore, but all that's left to it is the outer rim of cuboidal cells. It is yellowish, and it's a gland-producing sac. It is making progesterone and estrogen through day 28. So for 2 more weeks, it's going to continue to stay in that ovary and crank out those hormones. In Latin, luteum means yellow. The word corpus means body. So this is a yellow body, but it's a yellow gland sac is what it is. But that's what corpus luteum means, yellow body in your ovary. If by day 28 you don't get pregnant, and you have to have a feedback mechanism from the little embryo that's dug into the side wall of your uterus, if that signal doesn't get sent by way of the blood to your brain, then this corpus luteum degenerates. It loses its yellow color, and it becomes pale white. Alba means white. So then it's called corpus albicans, and then it finally heals up. And there's no evidence where it was in a very few days. And then you start all again next month, ripening a new Graafian follicle, releasing the egg on day 14, and then you have a new yellow corpus luteum gland sac in case you get pregnant that month. So this is the story we're going through each month. Okay? Are we okay so far? Yes.
So the cuboidal cells around it, that's what's making the progesterone.
Yeah, these cuboidal cells are making P&E, progesterone and estrogen, and also right here in the yellow gland sac, these are making P&E. So you have 2 sources of it. Yes.
This is kind of off topic
It's all right.
a little bit. With birth control, I know they have it for 3 months. Does it prevent the egg from coming out as
Yeah, what birth control, whether it's a pill or whether it's a subdermal implant or whether it's an O-ring or whether it's a patch or probably something else I don't even know about, they're all releasing a little bit of the P&E in your body, and they're fooling your body, and your body goes, you're already pregnant. So if you're already pregnant, it doesn't ripen a new Graafian follicle. So it's tricking your body, and that is exactly why, should you decide to have a family, most times your OBGYN is saying, get off of your hormone regimen, whatever it is, and stay off of it for a few months to make your body have to learn to cycle through its normal routine without this artificial chemical in your system. And that is a wise recommendation, because you don't want to have a miscarriage because your body didn't wake back up to full roar, number one. And number two, you don't want the wrong levels of hormones in there when you're developing your new infant. So that would be strongly recommended, that you let a few months cycle around and make sure your body's doing it well. I'll tell you right off the bat, if you've never had a child before, a body that's never gone through all the steps is more likely to miscarriage than a body that has done it before. Which, you would never have to tell somebody something sad like that, but if they did miscarry, you can say, but now your body's practiced it once. If they're not finding something structurally or chemically wrong in your system, it probably just made a mistake, and you are less likely to miscarry. If they didn't find a structural or chemical imbalance, you're less likely to miscarry on a second try than someone who's never tried before. So, and a lot of us have miscarriages and we don't even know it. It's so early in the process, you just think, well, maybe I don't remember when I was supposed to have my menstrual flow, or maybe you have a little bit heavier menstrual flow. Well, half of us have a light one 1 month and a killer bee the next anyway. So, do you really know what's coming month to month? Anyway, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's faking you out. Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody's doctors, but you know, pharmaceutical reps come in and really give them great perks if they'll promote something. So I would be very careful if I had a daughter to suggest that she try some things that are new out on the market. I would want something that's been out there for at least decades, so you know what the ramifications are. This shutting your system down for 2 years, 5 years at a time, that hadn't been out there very long. I would be cautious if I were you to do something that drastic to the body, but that's just me talking. I certainly would investigate it carefully if I were you. Yeah.
I've known 3 different people who've done that thing in your arm that stops your period, or stops you for 3 to 5 years. All 3 of them, when they first got it in, were literally crazy.
Well, and here's another.
They had suicidal thoughts and everything like that.
And here's another thing. Bodies are different, and if you have one of those long-term whatever technique, some bodies catabolize it quicker than others. So you have to go in and see, is it really still protecting you against pregnancy? If you're a fast catabolizer, it may not make it the length of time it's supposed to, and then you're vulnerable anyway. Wouldn't that be disastrous? But and here's the other thing, not about any kind of artificial contraception. If you're an extreme athlete and you're so lean that you have less than 7.5% body fat, a lot of times you won't have a menstrual cycle. Your body says, you know, you're putting all your energy into this, we can't let this happen. So really big athletes that really work hard, they sometimes, if we're supposed to have our menstrual cycles kicking in at 9 to 13 years of age, they may be 16, 17 and still haven't had it, but it's probably that they are low body fat. So that's another thing that can influence all this.
Is it the same thing, like if you have high body fat? Because I have a friend that she says if she hits like the 200 mark, she'll stop having a period.
I never had heard that, but then I've never looked that up. So, you know, anything that's stressing your body can affect glands and will. So it may be, but I'd have to look that up. Okay. I'm just saying there are all kind of factors that feed into this that we don't have time, but I mean, it's fascinating. It's a wonder we all have a normal kid at all. When you see all the little chances that things can have a little glitch here and there. All right, so now we're gonna talk about this cycle. Now, the problem with the female is she's not just making an egg. That's all he's doing. He's just making a sperm. But the female is making the egg, and then she has to incubate the egg for 9 months. So we have to go through this 28 days twice. Once for what she did when she's just making the egg, and once for what happens in the uterus should the egg get there or not get there and implant. Okay? So we got to look at 2 different organs in her, is what I'm telling you. So the front of this page, we're looking at the ovary. That's why B is called the ovarian cycle. What good's an ovary? What's it do for you? Makes an egg, that's one thing. And it makes the P&E. It makes the progesterone and estrogen, the female secondary sex hormones that make you look like a female and function as a female. So that's its role, just like the testis makes sperm and makes the testosterone. Well, anyway, back to the story. What does E do in your body? Estrogen. It vasodilates the vessels of your uterus so that if there is a implanted infant in there, you're getting a big supply of oxygenated blood and nutrients going to that uterus, so that's a good thing. It causes your breast to develop, mammary gland development. Look what it does to your uterus. It makes your uterus contract. So would you want a lot of estrogen at the beginning? No, because if you got a wildly contracting uterus, it could push that fertilized egg out before it had a chance to dig in and grab hold and be a parasite for the next 19 years. 9 months. Okay. But anyway, so you want a calm uterus at the beginning of the stage. But as the baby starts getting big at 7 months, you want uterine contractions because now it's developed a lot of tissue layers in that baby. So you want to help pump rich blood into that developing baby. So later in pregnancy is when estrogen levels are supposed to creep up and dominate so that you're having those Braxton Hicks contractions. They don't hurt. You just tighten up like a watermelon. So you're aware that you're having them, but it's not any kind of pain at all. It's just you feel like somebody could thunk on you and you'd echo. You're so tight. But anyway, it activates cilia in the oviduct. That would be to get the egg to come out of the fallopian tube and into the uterus where it might implant in your rich blood nest. And it does cause the development of secondary sex characteristics. Breast development is one. Widening of hips is another, so you can accommodate the passage of the baby at the time of birth, etc. Okay, depositing fat under your skin, that's a female sex characteristic. Okay, so that's what estrogen does. Progesterone does some things that are like estrogen, but it does some things that are completely opposite to what estrogen does. So this maintains your blood nest, your uterine lining. So that's a biggie. So what would happen if you had too low of progesterone at the beginning of a pregnancy? You might spot, you might bleed. And if you bled enough, that's a spontaneous miscarriage. So sometimes you miscarry just because you don't have enough progesterone at the beginning. This also vasodilates uterine vessels, so that's just like this one, rich blood flow coming into the uterus. This also makes your breast develop, mammary gland development, just like this one. But this one calms your uterus down. This inhibits uterine contraction. So progesterone is the one we want in the first little bit of pregnancy. So everything's calm and you're not shooing that fertilized egg out before it has a chance to attach well. So this one should be high at the beginning. This one should increase later. Okay, so we'll see that as we go along. And what I've tried to do is circle significant hormones if there's more than one acting in a certain time period, so you know which one is the really important one in that step. So, here's what we need to happen if you're going to make progesterone and estrogen. It starts in your brain by a releasing factor, luteinizing hormone releasing factor. I told you in lab a long time ago it's called luteinizing because it's going to keep that yellow gland sac, corpus luteum, intact. So that's a releasing factor. All releasing factors go to the anterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland releases a hormone by the same name, luteinizing hormone. In the blood, it goes to your ovary where you grew the yellow corpus luteum gland sac. And it keeps that intact so that you're continuing to pump out progesterone and estrogen. So this is just telling you, if you release that, you will maintain that, ultimately. If you quit releasing this, what's going to happen? you're going to bleed because you're going to break down this, and therefore you're not maintaining your uterine lining, and that's why you have your menses, your blood release during your menstrual cycle, okay? So this is the key to everything about whether or not you're having a menstrual cycle at the moment. So here we go. Day 1 through 5, you are having your menstrual cycle. And that's because your brain is not releasing the luteinizing hormone releasing factor, that's hypothalamus. Therefore, your anterior pituitary is not releasing the luteinizing hormone. Therefore, you did not maintain your corpus luteum. And so, if you didn't maintain your corpus luteum, you didn't get the female hormones, progesterone and estrogen. So, your blood lining, which is known as your endometrium, partially degenerates and is shed, and that's dead and dying tissue now. Blood vessels don't like dead and dying tissue, so they will pull back out of the region that is dying. That's called necrosis. Withdrawal of blood vessels back into healthy tissue of the uterus is necrosis, and that is why a good portion of your endometrium will be sloughed as your menses, as your blood that is lost. Now you start anew. So the first thing you need to do is ripen an egg. So look what the day 6 through 13 is called follicular stage, because you're growing a new Graafian follicle. Or it's before day 14. Day 14 is your coming out party, ovulation day. So another name for it is pre-ovulatory phase, before you release the egg. So either one of those names is what's going on in the ovary. If you were a little girl and you weren't yet having monthly menstrual cycles, then these hormones right here would just make your ovary continue to develop. But once you hit 9 to 13, that's a 9, then you're going to ripen an egg. So it's follicle, because we're going to make a Graafian follicle, an egg sac, follicle stimulating hormone releasing factor from your brain's hypothalamus, pituitary gland, anterior lobe, follicle stimulating hormone, so you ripen a follicle. It was called a primordial follicle when you were born. When it starts to ripen, it gets a cavity inside. The cavity full of colloid to store the hormone is an antrum. So that's why this is called the antrum stage, when it has developed a little cavity in the egg sac. When it's got all the support tissue, the cuboidal cells that can crank out the progesterone and estrogen, then it's a mature Graafian follicle. So these are just stages of ripening. That's all in the world those are. And I showed you those stages to you on a puppy chart in lab one day. So now you are beginning to release some progesterone and estrogen from the Graafian follicle. And remember, we need this one to be the dominant one here shortly, so that we maintain our endometrium uterine lining, our blood nest for your baby should it come along. So the dominant hormone in days 6 through 13 is going to be FSH. Now it's day 14. Day 14 makes the egg rip out of your ovary wall. The dominant hormone now is luteinizing hormone. So again, it's from the anterior pituitary, so it's controlled by a releasing factor from your brain. Hypothalamus releases luteinizing hormone releasing factor. Luteinizing hormone is released from your anterior pituitary gland, which progesterone is starting to increase, but it's not the main one yet. So there are actually 2 hormones, but I've circled the dominant one. Luteinizing hormone makes you keep that yellow corpus luteum. Therefore, not only did you release the egg, you are in the process of producing the female sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen, from that yellow gland sac. That is why for the last 2 weeks of the month, day 15 through 28, you've now accomplished this, so the dominant hormone now is progesterone, but there still is a little tiny bit of luteinizing hormone still being produced. So this stage, you've already released the egg the day before. This stage is therefore either post-ovulatory stage, after ovulation day, Or because you're depending on the corpus luteum, yellow gland sac, another name for it is the luteal phase. So those are two different names for this time in the ovary. So because that dominates, your blood nest is intact, the endometrium. Because this is the dominant one, your uterine muscles are calm. You're not contracting, so the egg will have a chance to dig in and hang on. Okay? And good thing you're still continuing this hormone pathway, because it means you keep your yellow gland sac and you keep cranking out your estrogen and progesterone. Are we okay? All right. Let's look at what happens on those same days, those same clumps of days, 1 through 5, 6 through 13, day 14, and the last 2 weeks, but in your uterus instead. So this is 28-day cycle of your uterus. This is your uterus, your womb where the baby's going to develop. So it's called the menstrual cycle because that's where the discharge is from. Menarche is the beginning of monthly menstrual cycles. Average 9 to 13, although it's getting earlier, 8, 7. They don't know whether that's because of all the hormones in food, because we treat our animals with hormones prophylactically so they are stronger and don't get diseased. They don't even need the hormones, but we do it because it's cheaper to treat them on that end. Well, maybe we ain't so smart, because indirectly it leaches off, runs down into the water systems or in the food that we harvest from these animals, and so we're getting more hormones. Or maybe we're just maturing quicker than this age because maybe our health is better. Maybe we eat better than previous generations. Maybe medical science is better than previous generations. Maybe it's all of the above. But for whatever reason, it may be sooner than this that you start your monthly menstrual cycles. Menopause can be much earlier than this. It's a genetic thing. Some women are going to end their monthly menstrual cycles in their 30s. But generally we say 45 to 55 years of age, so 50 is usually, textbook number if you're only going to give one number, but it can be quite varied. What we think causes menopause is your hypothalamus stutters. That's what we think. And so if your hypothalamus stutters, you're not getting the signals to build up your endometrium, and therefore when it finally peters out completely, then you'll quit having monthly menstrual cycles. So you may be one of those women that gets to age 50, all of a sudden 1 month, no more monthly menstrual cycles, and you never had any evidence of it ever again. But a lot of women don't do it like that. They may get up to 50, and then 1 month they don't have one. The next month they have a little tiny one. The next month they have a little tiny one. The next month they didn't have one. But each of these months they might be secreting a little bit of the hormone. And so by the 4th month they may have a full-blown one. And you think, darn, I thought I was over with that. And you do that for a year or so, and then finally it just disappears completely. So that's the theory, is your hypothalamus is stuttering in its hormone or releasing factor secretion. But anyway, that's called menopause. A term that I've been using, the blood loss from your body, is called menses. So remember what the story was in day 1 through 5. That's when your brain didn't make a release. So if you had no luteinizing hormone releasing factor, then your anterior pituitary gland, where releasing factors always go, didn't release luteinizing hormone. If it didn't release luteinizing hormone, you're not going to maintain your yellow gland sac, corpus luteum, so you're not going to have progesterone and estrogen. That is what kept your endometrium blood nest intact. So you won't keep it intact. Therefore, it degenerates, sheds some of it, vessels withdraw, you're having your supposedly 5-day monthly menstrual flow. Okay? One more comment on hormone therapy, like the oral contraceptive pill or O-ring or whatever, your patch, whatever. Some people are on it not just for contraception. Some people, your physician will encourage you to get on it because you're just bleeding too much. Either too many days, too many cycles in a month, or when you bleed, you're just throwing blood clots all over the place and you're just becoming anemic. You're losing so much blood. So that is one of the reasons those pills were developed, is it will, what's the word I want? Reduce, or you won't have as severe a cramps sometimes, and you won't have as big a blood loss. And so that was solving that problem for borderline anemic women that were just having too big of a loss of blood. And you know, you don't want to have a hysterectomy or anything if you don't have to, because when you start pulling out organs that are affected by hormones, then you're talking about possible hormone imbalances later. Most of the hormones, though, are in the ovaries, so if you leave the ovaries, they think it's not going to be that bad. But you want to leave an organ in unless there's a justifiable reason for snatching it out. Okay. Day 6 through 13, proliferation means growing. What are we growing? We're growing our blood nest. So this is the proliferative phase of your uterus. You're growing your endometrium. So it's the same hormone that was on the ovary at this time. The ovary was ripening an egg. So the hormone is follicle stimulating hormone releasing factor, which made the anterior pituitary gland release follicle stimulating hormone. But now you've got a ripe egg sac. The minute you have a ripe Graafian follicle, you've got the cuboidal cells in there releasing the female's hormones, progesterone and estrogen. P is circled. It's the important one here because it makes you regrow your endometrium blood nest in the wall of your uterus. So in terms of the uterus, we're seeing what these same hormones did in your uterus. Okay, day 14 means nothing to your uterus. I'm just reminding you that the main one here that triggered the egg to rupture out of the ovary was luteinizing hormone. So I'm just telling you, the egg is on its way. And it only gets sucked up in the fallopian tube, gets 1/3 the way of those hormones into the fallopian tube, and gets fertilized by a sperm that swam 2/3 the way up the fallopian tube. So that's where fertilization occurs if it's gonna. So in terms of the uterus, we're interested in the last 2 weeks. Day 15 to 28, secretory, meaning something rich, very edematous, swollen with rich secretions. This is your swollen uterus. You've got a rich endometrium. It's perfect should conception, in other words, fertilization of an egg occur. It's all ready to receive it. So it's luteinizing hormone releasing factor, causing luteinizing hormone, and therefore you kept your yellow gland sac, corpus luteum, and it's secreting these two things, but the main one right now is this one. And this one is the one that makes you grow an endometrium. It's very edematous, it's rich, fluid-filled. And the other good news about P, progesterone, is a very calm uterus. A very, very calm uterus. Both P and E dilated your blood vessels to your uterus, so that's a good thing because we want the increased blood supply. Okay? If you didn't get pregnant, what would you do? You would shed your lining. In other words, you'd go back to day 1 through 5 where you have a menstrual cycle beginning and you're releasing your menses. Got it? Because of no hormones. But let's say you got pregnant. Let's say you got pregnant. Then right now, this is the dominant hormone and you're releasing some of that, which is a good thing. And remember, that's going to continue through to day 28. Okay? This egg was released on what day?
14.
Day 14. So if the egg was released on day 14, it's got 10 days before it gets to even day 24, right? So it's got 4 more days as a buffer period before you're going to bleed. It is by the 10th day, it will be implanted if it's going to. It gets to your uterus and it digs in by 10 days at the latest. So you're 10 days after ovulation. okay? So if you need to clarify that. 10 days after ovulation would put you on the 24th day of the regular month. So now it's dug in to the placenta. It's dug in and it starts making its placenta, excuse me. Here's wee bambino. Oh, you've got a little tail at first. That's his head end with eye spot. There's some limb buds, little fat belly. There's some hind limb buds. He's got an umbilical cord. And at the end of his umbilical cord, he grows his own capillary bed. So this is capillaries of the infant, and that is known as the chorion of your baby. This is mom's uterus, and he's plugging in like a piece of sod on one side of her uterus. So her uterus over there is growing capillaries that are intimately associated with his, but they're not grown into his. Her blood is her blood, his blood is his blood. This is what we've been calling her endometrium of mom. The two things together are the placenta. This and this together are the placenta. But the placenta, besides being a way for oxygen and nutrients to go to the baby, and then the baby gives mom all the crud, waste, CO2, etc., the placenta is also a gland. So the minute this baby dug in, it's starting to make the chorion. And so it's already starting to act as a gland. So one of the first hormones that the placenta secretes is called chorionic gonadotropin. Which capillary bed did it come from? The baby's half, the chorion. So if the mother's body is detecting chorionic gonadotropin, the mother's body is pregnant because it came from the baby's half of the placenta. Chorionic gonadotropin. And what this says over here that's chopped off is EPT. EPT is an early pregnancy test. And what turns it positive is chorionic gonadotropin hormone has come out of your body in your urine. And you dip that dipstick, and if it turns positive for pregnancy, it's because you ain't pregnant unless you're making chorionic gonadotropin. Okay? If you are, you are. End of story. And usually by somewhere about 10 to 14 days, it'll turn one of those strips positive. So, we were supposed to go to the doctor, see if our body had picked up any germs that were dangerous that we needed to get a vaccination for or something like that, like German measles or all these other things. We don't do that. We wait until we feel oozy-goozy, we're turning green. We go to the supermarket, buy EPT test our urine, find out we're positive, and then we call up and make a doctor's appointment. And he repeats the test, but that's okay. You're not wasting your time and money and your day off. And from then on, every time you go in, he tests your blood and see how things are going. Okay, well, you're pregnant. Chorionic gonadotropin, like all these other hormones, enters your blood and travels around your body. So it goes up to your hypothalamus of your brain where you are releasing the releasing factor. And so it tells the hypothalamus, don't you stop. Because normally at day 28, this is going to stop and you're going to bleed. Remember? Because you're going to be back to day 1 through 5. This chorionic gonadotropin is telling your brain, don't stop. So this will keep on cranking out the releasing factor, which keeps your anterior pituitary gland secreting the luteinizing hormone, which goes to your ovary and keeps you cranking out the progesterone and estrogen from the yellow gland sac called corpus luteum. And it's supposed to be able to do that for 3 months is the generic number. The textbook magic number is 3 months. This is the glitch. Sometimes a woman will only keep her corpus luteum gland sac 1 month after this signal. Some women do it beautifully and keep it there 5 months. no worries in that case. But the glitch is you got to make it to 3 months. And after that, this mechanism may shut down. But by then, the placenta is supposed to be making its own progesterone and estrogen. It doesn't need this signal anymore. So that's what it says by here. By 3 months, the placenta makes P and E. But see, sometimes people are making enough at 6 weeks. But for other people, it may take them 4 months to get enough. What's going to happen if you're the woman who she did this part right and made it last for 3 months, but her placenta was slow developing and she needed 4 months to get enough progesterone and estrogen? She got miscarried and bleed because she needed her placenta to make the P and E, and her placenta is not well enough developed. So that is what they call the first trimester, the first 3 months of pregnancy, when a lot of couples don't tell anybody they're pregnant yet, because if you're going to have a problem, it's most likely going to occur there, because these time factors are so critical. You got to have this stay around 3 months, you've got to have this develop by 3 months. If all that goes fine, you're cool. But if either one of them jumps the gun and this goes away too quick and this develops too slowly, then you're the person that may have to try again another time. Okay? So in the first 3 months, it is the progesterone that's dominating. From then on, estrogen starts to rise, so later in pregnancy, it's definitely the dominant one. But it's not usually strong enough that it can expel your baby. This is the problem, though. If you, at the beginning, you did not make enough of this, then you might have an overactive uterine muscle contraction, and it never got to implant well. So hormones, hormones, hormones. The progesterone and estrogen are so critical in those first 3 months. Okay, let's say everything's fine. You did your hormones like you're supposed to. Now you're ready for labor and delivery, birth. The word for that is parturition. Parturition. Now you're going to have less progesterone, because we don't want to calm the uterus, more estrogen. You're trying to get this big baby pushed towards the cervix. And finally, when the head is starting to push down in the top of the cervix, you hit those pressure receptors. So guess what the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland are cranking out now? Oxytocin. It was made in your hypothalamus. It was released from the posterior lobe of your pituitary gland. That's the one that made you have the wallpaper peeling, full-blown labor and delivery contractions. Now, if you are a female, a lot of times, about 20 minutes before the big oxytocin labor contractions start, you rupture your amniotic sac of waters. Just let me say, if you think you can wear a Depends undergarment because you were feeling mild menstrual type cramps from 2 o'clock in the morning and you decide, well, I'll go to work, they're not getting any worse. You know, it can go on for days or it can get really fast. You don't know what it's going to do from baby to baby. But, so you went on to work and you thought, but I do know I'm having these menstrual feeling type cramps. And you thought, well, I'll just put on Depends undergarment. Amniotic fluid is a big enough volume, that's not going to disguise that your water breaks. So just know that if you are going to be very inhibited or shy about it, then don't go to work if you know that it's coming on. And then as it gets accelerating, the cramps will get a little more. At first you're going, am I making this up? And then they get a little worse and a little worse, and then you know. But once your water breaks, you got to hit the road. Grab your bags and hit the road, because you do not want to be by yourself when full-blown labor and delivery contractions occur. Now let's say, okay, your water broke, you ran in the house, you got a quick shower, you grabbed your little bag, so you cleaned up. When you get in the hospital and they make you gown up, the first thing they do is take a little tape, color change tape, and push it against your perineum floor, your pelvic floor. It'll turn color if it's amniotic fluid. Well, you cleaned up. It's not going to change color. So what you have to do is force a little bit of fluid to come out of your body. It will. There's plenty left in there. When it comes out, then it'll do positive. Otherwise, they're going to look at you and go, no, honey, you just must have urinated on yourself. You've got that big baby inside you, and they think you can't control your bladder at that stage of the game anyway. You knew your water broke. Press down, make some fluid come out. Because otherwise, you're not going to make it home before the full deal is going to start. Some people's water doesn't break, and they don't want you to have, they want you to have the lubrication of it, so they will break it for you usually. But if your water broke and you don't, within a short period of time, go into contractions, they will probably give you Pitocin, the artificial, because they don't want you to have a dry birth. They don't want it to be too long after your water broke, because that's harder for you to deliver, maybe. So those are the typical role. There are all kinds of other things that can occur. You know, C-sections are given for you ran out of amniotic fluid, in which case you don't get to pick your day. You're going right now if you don't have enough amniotic fluid in your body. They might take you in if they hear fetal heart is dangerous. Then you could have been pressing for 12 hours, but if you can't push that baby out because it's transverse or breech or what, they're going to take it for C-section instead of risk damaging the baby.
So what makes the amniotic sac burst? Just the contractions?
Yeah, the presenting part is pushing, and so it's stretching, and finally it pops it open. But sometimes it doesn't. It'll come out with the baby, but they have a little tool that they usually will rupture it for you at that point. Yeah. What else? Okay. Then I'll see you in lab in about 15 minutes.